We're in the sermon series on seeking God himself, just seeking his presence, not just what he offers us, but seeking God himself. What does God feel like when you make contact with him? You see God, you actually make contact with God. What does he feel like when you actually make contact with God himself? Think about that for 8 seconds, and then I will receive your brilliant answers. Does God feel like? All right, tell me, what does God feel like when you make contact with him? God feels like love. Somebody had to say it. That's scriptural, right? God is love, we're told in 1 John. That is certainly a dominant characteristic of his presence, one would assume. Nick? God feels honest when you make contact with him. That's interesting. I'm thinking of that verse. There's no shadow of turning in him. Like, God is the ultimate. What you see is what you get. Absolutely no faking. It's an otherworldly experience when you actually encounter that. What else? Elton? Overwhelming peace. God feels like overwhelming peace when you make contact with him. That's not surprising. We would expect God to sort of chill us out a little bit. Hannah, you had one?
I think God feels different than anything you've felt before.
Yeah, a great answer, a simple answer. God feels different. Different than what? Yes. God feels different than anything else. So if you make contact with God, it is a one-of-a-kind experience. That's interesting, and that's certainly true. Who was it? Was it Dave?
Certain and confident.
Certain and confident. Yeah, that makes sense. That has an intuitive truth to it. If you encounter God, it's sort of a dead certain experience. Like, oh yeah, this is God, and he's all God, and that sort of certainty sort of breeds a confidence. Like, this is a trustworthy thing that I'm in contact with. Yeah, what do you got, Jace? Pure kindness, not just kindness, but pure kindness. I wonder what would be interesting if you said kind purity. That would be interesting too. But pure kindness, so there's no harboring of cruelty or malevolence or trickery or anything like that. There's a purity, but it's a purity that you really like. Who is that in the back? Is that Charlene? Oh, he feels familiar. Well, that says something about God and something about Charlene. If you've had this one-of-a-kind experience with God, you're not going to mistake it the next time. You're not going to mistake it the next time. And who else was that? Zach? Terrifying. Yeah. God feels really, really peaceful and utterly terrifying. Yeah. That has sort of an intuitive truth to it as well. We see this a lot in Scripture. When people encounter God, they quake. The word is, sometimes we read in Scripture, they fall down, they come undone. It's an otherworldly experience, and that can be very rattling for sure. And of course, if you need to get right with God in that moment, dang, you get right with God. Because if you're in his presence, there's no room for wiggling. It is what it is. And there's one hand over here. This is going to be the best answer. Two hands over here. What you got, Carrie?
Sometimes I feel like crying. Raw emotion.
Sometimes she feels like crying, so raw, emotional. What else? That's it? Oh, you said sometimes. I thought there was going to be and other times. Like, no, just sometimes I feel like crying. Yeah, it was Dave.
Surprising or shocking and
Oh,
unexpected and all.
yeah, that's really interesting. Like, if you make contact with God, it's surprising, and it's so interesting, that answer, because like, yeah, I've been following God for years, I've been believing God with years, and then I bump into him, and it's like, what the heck is this? But he's everything that you expected and nothing that you expected. That's really interesting. It kind of goes to it being a one-of-a-kind experience. I feel like you guys are starting to warm up now. We could go. What are you guys trying to?
Feel like I'm be a part of it.
You feel like you want to be part of it, or you are a part of it?
I'm a part of it.
Oh, it's interesting. When you encounter God, there's sort of a unity there. You're not alienated, right? You're not alone. You're like woven into whatever this presence is. That's interesting. And we'll give John the last answer.
I feel like he's the calm in the storms of life.
Oh yeah, the calm in the storms of life. So not just peaceful, but kind of like in the midst of all the storms and all the chaos. This is stillness. God is stillness itself. He's the one that around which all the other things rotate and shift in life. All really good answers. Like I said, we're doing this sermon series on seeking after God. And we talked about how seeking God is a necessary life skill. You might think that once you find Jesus and you become a believer, you become a follower, that your seeking days are done. But Jesus actually says that seeking is the secret to the kingdom of heaven on earth, that we have to seek throughout all the days of our life. I've talked about how it's really important to me to get our youth prepared with seeking skill, so that when they go away to college or they enter the workforce for the first time and they start hearing questions and doubts about God that they've never heard before, they don't just crumble because nobody's taught them how to seek answers, right? There's an endless array of questions. And so we can't just teach pat answers. We have to teach the skill and the virtue of seeking itself. And that's what Jesus said. Seeking is the secret to walking in the kingdom of heaven on earth. And then we've talked about some various stories of people seeking God's presence in Scripture. We talked about seeking God in the midst of exhaustion. There was a story of Elijah, and if you've been beaten down by effort and life, and how he sought God by traveling into the wilderness to Mount Oreb to seek the very presence of the Lord himself. And that's what you should do when you're exhausted. We talked about being the sort of person that seeks God himself as opposed to just seeking goodies from God. And in that instance, we talked about the relationship that Moses had with God. Moses was called a friend of God. He just sought God. God offered him all sorts of blessings to move the Israelites on without him. But Moses said, no, I'd rather have your presence, and the people need your presence. Maybe you want to be a friend of God like that, a man or a woman of God's presence like that. You don't have to be, but if you are a friend of God, you're really valuable to the rest of us, because it's good to know a friend of God. And that person can put in a good word for the others. We talked about seeking God for real, by which we meant being a seeker of God in all sorts of life situations, being the same sort of seeker in public that you are in private, and private that you are in public, being a seeker of God in good times and a seeker of God in those times where you feel like God has let you down. We talked about the Psalm of David. We talked about getting stuff out of the way. Sometimes to seek after God means that you don't seek after other things, that you have to set them aside. And one of the disciplines that we have as seekers of God in this world is that we set aside things that might pull our attention, good things, but things that nevertheless can get in the way. And that's part of the skill of seeking. To be a focused seeker, sometimes you can only seek God, one thing at a time. And after all of this talk of seeking, I just thought that I'd do a little meditation this morning on what it's like when you actually bump into him. Oh, it's you. And you make contact with the living God in a real, sometimes we say physical way. I don't know, that word physical is inelegant because, what's physical, what's spiritual? I don't know. To make contact with God materially and really. And as I was thinking about this week, I thought about a whole smattering of scriptures. I'll just dive straight into the scriptures this week. For whatever reason, I was thinking about this story from Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, where Solomon dedicates the temple. You guys ever read about that episode in the Old Testament? Here's what happened. For a long time, the Israelites just worshiped God at a tabernacle. It was like this special tent that Moses and the guys put together when they were wandering in the wilderness, and they had that for a while. And then David, when he becomes king, he gets this idea that he's going to build a permanent place for the nation of Israel to worship, and he wants to build a temple. And God says, well, not you, David. You can get the materials together, but I'm going to have your son do it. So Solomon, David's son, is the one that actually builds the temple. And it's a long process. They've gotten the designs from God himself. It came through like prophetic worship, actually. And the architecture is very special. Everything about it is symbolic, in the temple. And so they build it. And then Solomon and all of the priests, and there's a whole tribe of Israel that is priests. All of them dedicate the temple with great specialness. They cleanse the entire structure. They anoint the structure with oil and incense and fragrances. And then there's all the implements that they use for the temple. The candles and the bowls and the altar pieces. And all of those things get ceremonially cleansed and anointed and dedicated. And then the priests who gather to dedicate the temple in front of the entire nation of Israel, they consecrate themselves, which is to say they cleanse themselves ceremonially, and they do some fasting to sort of like dedicate their flesh, set aside their flesh for the Lord, special prayers and worship, and they wear special garments. In other words, they do everything they can to make everything about the dedication of the temple special. We've got to make this special as much as we can. And when you read the account of this process, a word that gets used a lot is the word holy. I love the Hebrew word for holy. It means literally weird. So they do things that are weird, one-of-a-kind things. But that's one way in which we make stuff special. So there's a lot of weirdness going on. There's a lot of sacredness. There's a lot of sanctification going on, these words like that. And then the last thing they do is that these special priests who have been all cleansed and dressed and dedicated, they pick up the Ark of the Covenant, there's a chest. It's like overlaid with gold, and it's built with acacia wood, which is like koa wood. It's a cousin tree, actually. And inside the chest are the tablets that the Lord carved the Ten Commandments on, so it's a special artifact. And there's a seat on top of it for the presence of God to sit, So they carry in the Ark of the Covenant, and they put it in the Holy of Holies, which is what they call the center of the temple. The most special of special, or the weirdest of weird, is the name of this room. And they set down the Ark of the Covenant, and then they back out, and they put a curtain. So everything about this dedication is special and consecrated. And then we read this. I'm picking it up in 2 Chronicles 5. The priests then withdrew from the holy place, and all the priests who were there had consecrated themselves, regardless of their divisions. So every division of priests were there. Remember, this is a whole tribe. So there are hundreds of these guys at work. And all the Levites who were musicians, Asaph, Heman, Jeduthun, and their sons and relatives, stood on the east side of the altar, dressed in fine linen and playing cymbals, harps, and lyres. So there's this tribe of Levites. All they do is they take care of the temple. There's an entire 1/12 of the nation of Israel dedicated to caring for the temple. And there are certain clans within the larger tribe of Levi who are musician clans. These guys are like entire families, entire islands, of worship leaders. And so there would be hundreds of these guys, hundreds of them, and they're all to the east side of the altar, to the east side of the temple, jamming out. Hundreds of musicians, maybe thousands, and they're playing their cymbals, their drums, their harps and lyres, their bass and guitars. And they were accompanied by 120 priests sounding trumpets. So I've got no idea what this musical arrangement is like, but it is epic. Imagine 120 trumpets going to play in some melody in unison, and a rock band that is thousands of musicians strong, all of them professional musicians dedicated to worship music. And the trumpeters and singers, there are singers too, joined in unison as with one voice to give praise and thanks to the Lord. So they've got some kind of melody, and the trumpets and hundreds of voices are playing it simultaneously. So imagine like the largest rock concert you could ever think of. You know, it's like Woodstock, except everybody there is in the band. It's not just Jimi Hendrix playing Star Spangled Banner in the morning. It's like thousands of strong, and they're all playing the same melody. Everybody, it's like the mosh pit to end all mosh pits. And representatives from the entire nation of Israel are there. So it's like, you know, tens of thousands of people, wherever you looked. And they're all singing one song together, just jamming. It's like incredibly loud, 110 decibels. It's like, you know, a Who concert. I'm dating myself. What would be? There is no modern day analog to the Who. That's what's happened to music. But it's like, you know, the loudest rock concert you could ever imagine, the biggest rock concert you could ever imagine, the biggest rock festival you could ever imagine, everybody doing the same song, accompanied by trumpets, cymbals, and other instruments. They raised their voices in praise to the Lord and sang, "He is good. His love endures forever." So they're just singing this refrain. He is good. He's good. His love endures forever. Ever. Just imagine this scene. Just how incredibly epic and cinematic it would have been. Then the temple of the Lord was filled with a cloud. The cloud of God's presence. And the priests could not perform their service because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the temple. In this physical, material, manifestational way, the presence of God came, and you could see the presence in cloud, and it was the glory of the Lord. So I don't know what that looked like, but it was like obvious, you know. And this cloud fills the temple that they've gone out of their way to make special and to dedicate. And the priests could no longer perform because the glory was strong. So here's what happens, right? This is the loudest noise anybody on earth had ever heard to that point. Everybody's singing the same song, and then the cloud goes, and everybody all at once just goes silent. Just imagine how epic that silence would have been. Just like, rah, rah, and everybody together just like, ugh, because they can feel it. They can feel it. The presence of God just shushes the entire landscape. And the priest can no longer do anything. If you're close to the temple, you're just taken out right there. You got the image in your head? You got it? You guys are a little low energy. You got it? Yeah, we got it. That's a great description. You, Jordan, are a master storyteller. That's what you wanted to say. So here's my question. Imagine this day. Would you have wanted to be there for this experience? Yeah? Now you're excited. You'd want to be there to have experienced this moment? Why? Why? That sounds cool. That's a good Gen Z answer. It's cool. Well, let me ask it a slightly different way. Would it have made a difference for you? What difference would it have made for you to be there? I mean, really actually think about this. I mean, I know it's a Hollywood drama sort of experience, right? This is something out of like the biggest, I don't know, something out of the Lord of the Rings or something. And you would want to be there. What would it have done for you? I read this story and it's like, man, I wish I had been there. I wish I had been there. And then I have to ask myself, well, Jordan, why? What would you have taken away? So think about that. And then give me your serious answers. If you want to be there, obviously you think you would have gotten something out of it. Tell me, what would you have gotten out of it? What you got, Robin?
I mean, I think we have that now in worship, but back then they didn't have that very regularly. So if I lived back then, I would want that because maybe the only time I ever experienced the presence of God in a tangible way that I could sense and see and feel.
So you want to be there because it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. So you want to be there on that day because there was no other day like it, perhaps for you. That's good. So certainly a once-in-a-lifetime experience. What would you have gotten out of it? The presence of God. What would you have gotten out of that?
It seems like that kind of stuff happened a lot when the church started. Like they talked about the building shaking and things of that nature.
Uh-huh.
And I think it really made them fearless in the face of persecution.
Fearlessness. If you have an experience like that, then the things in the world that frightened you perhaps would no longer frighten you. That God is so epic that other things just seem manini in comparison. Yes?
It would have given me a meaning for my life.
It would have given you the meaning for your... I thought that was me. It would have given you the meaning for your life. Well, that's interesting. Sonia says that having the experience of God's manifest presence would have somehow resulted in meaning for her life. That's interesting. You want to chew on that. You'd have to ask whys and wherefores about that. It was like, Dave.
I mean, it's one thing to internally have the feeling that God is with you, but communally have evidence that His presence is.
Yeah.
Really paid building on, obviously.
So this is insightful. Like David points out, not just that you yourself individually would get something out of it, but you've had this experience with tens of thousands of your countrymen, and so like that's a cultural moment, right? Like from then on, you all share an experience that none of you can deny, and so it probably changes you together for the rest of your history. So that's interesting. What you had, Elton?
I think like assurance that God is real and He's powerful.
Assurance, right? Assurance that God is real and He's powerful, which is interesting because, like you believe in God, you've been following God for a long, long time. You're quite serious about following God. But if you have an experience like this, you anticipate a level up in your faith somehow. It's like, this is an assurance. So we're all sort of looking for a little more faith. We're all looking for a little more assurance, a little more strength, a little less doubt. And something about encountering God in this sort of direct and powerful way would make it easier, one would think, at least. A couple more answers. Yeah, John?
Turn your back on sin and pursue more weirdness.
Turn your back on sin and pursue more weirdness, more holiness. There's something about having this experience would make you walk away from sin. Like the things that you're flirting with, the nastiness, the unhealthy things, you know. But you can't quite do it because, you're kind of a ridiculous human. But then you have an encounter with God and you're like, oh, I'll do it all right. I am totally weird. I am totally willing to be weird because the universe is weird. Something like that. What you?
I think to put language to it, if I would hope I would take away a deeper sense of the fear of the Lord.
I would hope, she says, that I would take away a deeper sense of the fear of the Lord, respect for God, that somehow that's good, that's healthy. And being in such an awesome presence, it takes the breath out of you. It takes the voice away from tens of thousands of people instantaneously. You carry a healthy respect after that moment, perhaps in a way that you hadn't. There was one more hand over here. David, this should be the final answer.
The reason why God shows up here is because He keeps His promises.
Mm.
God, He keeps covenant with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, with David, and Solomon picks up on that. And so the question is, are they going to continue to walk by this covenant, or are they going to cave to paganism in Canaan
Yeah.
that surrounds them? And so it seems like kind of this pivotal moment as to what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Solomon is kind of a pinnacle leader in a way.
So there's a lot going on there. David is remarking on the narrative. It's like, this is part of a story, where God is sort of making a people out of nothing. And everything that they've done to sort of dedicate this temple was based on a promise that God would be with them at the temple. I don't think they envisioned the cloud and all of that happening, but there was, a healthy respect for the presence of God with them. So when this goes down in such a powerful, direct, material way, it shows that God is, you didn't say this word, but reliable, right? God is a promise keeper. And that, of course, encourages you to be a promise keeper with respect to your promises and relationship with God. So there's a testimony to reliability and promises here. A lot of good things could happen in such a powerful moment, yes? And that's why we seek after contact with God. I mean, we know all of these things. We know we should have faith. We know that we should keep promises, right? We know that we should be fearless. We know that we should respect God. But then, bam, you have an encounter with God, and it's like, okay, now I know, right? Now I feel it in my bones. We have different phrases, but however you choose to describe it, that's what you get from seeking God himself, as opposed to just seeking God's ways or seeking blessings from God. But when you make contact with God, you get something that's really substantive, or I'll use the word changeful. If nothing else, it would have been a changeful experience. It would have hard to have been there that day and walked away unmoved. It would be hard to have been there that day and walked away unchanged. Now, maybe you being you, the change would not have been permanent because we're all a bit wishy-washy over time. But boy, it would help. You would walk away unchanged. One of the things I was thinking, like, if I were there that day, and I wish I was, I would have walked away from it wanting to be holy myself. There's this huge process of dedication and consecration. Like David pointed out, they did so much stuff just to get to this point. And all the cleansing and the anointing and the fasting and the praying and this ridiculous worship scene, a lot of specialness, a lot of working specialness went into this moment. And I would have walked away from that day thinking, oh, I want to be special all the time. I want to be consecrated. I want to be anointed. I want to be cleansed like all the time. I will fast permanently. I would have walked away with that attitude. I probably wouldn't have pulled it off. But it reminds me, I was thinking of the famous verse of Paul's letter to Timothy when he's talking about, he's talking about this story indirectly. And what Paul is saying to his young protege, Timothy, is, in a large house, there are articles not only of gold and silver, but also of wood and clay. Some are for noble purposes, and some for ignoble purposes. You know how in your house you have the noble bowls and then the ignoble bowls? You know that? Well, certainly in the temple, there would have been all of these bowls, all of these instruments that were purely for noble purposes, right? And those were the ones that were made of special substance, and they were cleansed in special ways. They were only used for the one thing. It's like, not anymore, but back in the day, every house had the special china. Like the dishes that you brought out only for the special occasions. These were consecrated dishes. Well, this is sort of what Paul is talking about, although with reference to the temple, there were things that were set aside only for godly use. If a man cleanses himself from the latter, from ignoble purposes, he will be an instrument for noble purposes, made holy, made weird, useful to the master, and prepared to do any good work. Paul is basically exhorting Timothy, being like, be like a holy space, right? Be like the temple, but in human form. Set yourself aside only for noble things, only for godly things, only for consecrated, sanctified things. Whatever is ignoble in your life, can't touch it. You can only touch noble things. Be that sort of person. And I think I would have walked away from 2 Chronicles 5, the temple dedication, feeling like I want to be special all the time. I want to be a vessel for filling, not for ignoble use. I don't want to be an oatmeal bowl. I want to be, a bowl for worship. And I also would have walked away, I think, with an experience that was helpfully personal. I think that although God came ostensibly for the whole nation of Israel in that moment, I probably would have walked away really wanting to be an individual for God. I'm thinking of, for whatever reason, of a line from Paul, from his letter to the Galatians. Paul had such a sense that he was a man of God, from God. He was all about God, and it gave him sort of a personal identity that stood him in good stead. I don't know if you've ever read the letter to the Galatians, but here's the story. Paul had planted a church. He's pretty much the church planter in Galatia, which is sort of like Asia Minor, Turkey area. And then he goes away, and then afterwards some pseudo-Christians come, and they tell the Galatians, hey, you can't trust what that guy Paul taught you. He's not a real apostle. He wasn't one of the guys that followed Jesus around. So, don't trust his teaching. Trust our teaching instead. And then they taught the Galatians some questionable things that weren't really true. And so Paul gets wind of this, and then he writes a letter to the Galatians. And he starts the letter by saying, this is from Paul, an apostle, sent not from men, but from God. In other words, I don't have to be among the original apostles. God sent me himself. And a little while later, he describes how his calling went down. You may remember this story. Paul was on the road to Damascus, and then he had a vision of the living Christ in the sky. It actually blinded him. Do you remember this story? And so Paul went from a guy who was murdering Christians to becoming a Christian in a moment. He was blind for 3 days, and somebody had to come pray for him and heal him. It's an epic story. And this is how he describes it to the Galatians. He says, but when God, who set me apart from birth and called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his son to me, it's such a euphemistic way to say it. Jesus appeared in the sky and blinded him. When God was pleased to reveal his son to me, Paul says, so that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not consult any man, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to see those who were apostles before I was. But I went immediately into Arabia and then returned to Damascus. Then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Peter and the other apostles. So only after 3 years of seeking God did Paul even bother to go consult with the other apostles. But there's a line in there that has always fascinated me. Paul has an encounter with Christ and a powerful conversion experience. Goes blind, gets prayed for, gets filled with the Holy Spirit. And then immediately, does he go to church? Does he go seek the other apostles? No, he goes into Arabia. What does that mean? Well, Arabia is where Mount Horeb is. It's where Mount Sinai is. It's the same mountain that Elijah ran to, and it's the same mountain that Moses met with God on. You see the 10 Commandments. So I think Paul is he's all blinded. He's like, oh my gosh, there is a Christ. I'm going to seek God. And, it's just like a Jewish person with these stories. It's like, where does one go to seek the very presence of God himself? I mean, the presence of God, not observance about God, but the presence of God. Where do I go? And the best answer he came up with, I'm going to go to Mount Horeb. I'm going to go to Sinai. And so he goes into Arabia. Footnote, the Israel Tourist Bureau says that Mount Sinai is in Israel. It's not. It's in Arabia. It's in Saudi Arabia. It's out in the middle of nowhere. And we know this from the stories. So he goes out there. How long does he go out there? I don't know, but his whole seeking God thing took 3 years. We know from the story of Elijah that it takes at least 40 days to hike there from where they were. So Paul just goes to seek God himself. And then what that does for him after having these experiences, he goes out into the world as an apostle to the Gentiles, and he feels sent by God. He doesn't feel backed by the church, although that's nice. He feels sent by God, right? His identity is, oh, I'm God's man. Wouldn't it be nice to feel that? You're God's man, you're God's woman. It's like, I'm here from God. You ever watch the Blues Brothers, the old movie? We're on a mission from God. Anybody? Anybody? Yeah, fine cinema. But for the rest of his life, Paul said that. Who are you? What are you doing here? My name is Paul. I'm sent by God. But that's what you get if you've done some serious seeking and you've encountered the presence of God himself. I sometimes tell stories in my sermons about times when I made contact with God. I usually do that to illustrate a point. But in thinking about, the Seeking God series, I've thought about, just many times in which I've encountered God sort of materially and directly. I not so long ago told the story of the first time that I got filled with the power of the Holy Spirit. This was in a dorm room. I'm being prayed for by a Mexican Pentecostal. And the Spirit came upon me. And that time, I remember my jaw shaking. And I was one of those guys, when I got filled with the Spirit, I started speaking in tongues, which is to say a language that I didn't understand. But it just came pouring out of me. And I would have described that experience as sort of an increase in fluency in more ways than one. It was just like, oh my gosh, I'm weird. This is great. Because it was a definitionally weird experience. A little while after that, I was involved with this church. It was a vineyard church in the San Francisco Peninsula where I went to school. We belonged to the Vineyard Association, if you're wondering. And the church they had small groups that met in people's homes during the week, just like we do. We have Ohana groups. So I went to one of these small groups. And toward the end of the small group, they're like, well, we're going to pray for people. Who wants prayer? And I'm like, pray for me. And so they got in a circle and they threw me in the middle, much like we do at our Ohana groups. And these guys prayed for me, just hanging out in this guy's living room praying for me. I remember the host who initiated the prayer was eating cookies while he was praying for me, which I thought was terribly irreligious. But they prayed for me, and I remember feeling like this presence come upon me. It's like, oh, this is a little bit like getting filled with the Holy Spirit, I thought. And I got a little bit woozy, which often happens in the Bible when people make contact with God, because that's a lot of power, God. There's a lot going on in God. And when you sort of bump against it, it's sort of, and my eyes were closed, but I remember thinking to myself, if I open them, I won't be able to see anyway. Because even though my eyes were closed, I just saw this light, it was like a blinding light with my eyes closed. I can't open my eyes to see this, I thought. And I remember sort of collapsing backward into one of the guys my church was holding me up, which is terribly embarrassing. But the thing I remember most from that experience is what it smelled like, which is something that nobody ever talks about. I know that it's weird. But when the experience was finally over and somebody asked me, what was going on there? What was it like? And here's what I said. I said, it smelled warm, which makes no sense. How does something smell warm? Like warm bread? No, it smelled like warmth itself. And I don't even know what I meant by that. And I don't know if I actually smelled anything or if it was just some sort of olfactory part of my brain that registered it somehow. But it smelled like warmth itself. And I've never forgotten that moment. They say that the sense of smell is the one that most imprints memories. I remember it like it's yesterday. It's just sort of this is a sense that I will walk with now for the rest of my life. A short while later, like the following year, I went away to this little retreat with my college fellowship. And the thing about my college fellowship is that they were mostly Presbyterian. And Presbyterians typically don't talk about making contact with the presence of God. Presbyterians talk about orderly worship. And so I was already a little bit of a weirdo in this group. And so we went off for this retreat. There were many campuses involved, actually. And for whatever reason, the leaders of the retreat invited this church from Santa Cruz to come and to lead worship one night. Remember this, Albert, that night? Albert was there. We've known each other way too long. And it was this charismatic church. It was a lot like Bluewater. And I think they were just supposed to come in to lead the worship that night. So they brought their whole worship band. I remember the worship band had 2 dedicated dancers, one on either side. And they were just in front sort of doing like a full-on dance. Anybody know the band Mighty Mighty Bosstones? Anybody? One person? A few people. All right. It was a band. They had a dedicated dancer. Every concert, there's a dancer, just some doofy frat dude that traveled with them and danced in front of the band. So that's what it was like. And then it was great raucous worship, and their pastor got up and shared a short message at the end of the worship. It was a very forgetful, wimpy message. I don't even know what he said. But then he said, I'm getting a word from the Lord that there are some people here that are like Peter. The Lord is setting you aside to really shake the foundations of the earth. I remember him saying, and I don't know how I knew this, but I knew that a wave was coming. Have you ever been out on the set floating on a surfboard and it's the wave hasn't risen yet, but you just know it's something about tension in the water. I don't know, but you're like, oh, a big one is coming. And you get into position and you turn around and you're ready to paddle. I just knew that a big wave was coming, a big wave of God's presence. I just knew it. And I was already kind of in trouble for being a weirdo in this college fellowship. So here's what I did. There was a stack of chairs in the rear of the auditorium. So I ran to the rear of the auditorium and I got behind the chairs so nobody could see me. And then sure enough, I was hit with a wave of God's presence and I went down, but nobody knew where I was. So I was down for like an hour and I fell smack on my face on this rancid carpet, and there was a waterfall of power on me such that I could not get up from the floor. And it didn't hurt, but it was just pounding power. And I could not move. And then afterwards I popped up and I prayed for some friends, all of whom experienced something similar. So that was embarrassing, but not, because it was entirely secret, because I'm clever that way. I went to, a few years later, I went to a conference in Anaheim, California, and this was another vineyard conference. I've told this story before. There was a man speaking that night at the conference named Leonard Ravenhill, if anybody knows him. He was 1970s revivalist, really hardcore preaching, a turn or burn type preacher. I mean, he was all of that. And in those days, he was already in his 80s, and he was super offensive, the things that he would say, If you're involved with this, you're a sinner and you have no part of God. And if you're involved with that, you're a sinner and you have no part of God. And he started praying for conviction and the spirit of revival to come. He was just a cranky old dude. But when he was saying this, the Spirit fell in the auditorium. There were 4,000 people in this auditorium. And at the same moment, 2,000 of them hit their face on the floor. The presence of God came into the room. And I remember, of course, I was one of them with my face on the floor again. And I was just weeping and repeating to myself over and over again, it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. And what I meant by that was nothing in life matters, only this. Only the presence of God and the truth of God's presence. And whatever else is going on, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But I could not say that enough to satisfy my soul. It was the spirit of conviction. And I've never experienced anything quite like it. So you would think, wow, man, that spirit of conviction falls in a room. But then I got up and Sonia was in the row next to me and we were walking unsteadily out of the auditorium late that night, whatever hours it was. I mean, it was an exhausting experience. And I realized that 1 out of 2 people in the room felt nothing. I was like, how is that possible? And as I was leaving the doorway in the auditorium, my pastor, the pastor of the church I attended, walked up to me and he said, Jordan, I'm so sorry that you had to experience all of this. That was offensive and fake. It was all emotional manipulation, and I apologize on behalf of the church. And I'm like, you are kidding me. That was the realest thing I'd ever felt in my life. And he was a good man. So what I realized is that he had taken offense. The preacher was so offensive that he took offense and could not receive the presence of God's conviction when it fell, right? I think about that story a lot when I think about the last 5 or 6 years in America, where everybody was getting offended at everyone else for all their worth. We were so judgmental, and I thought, no, this kills the presence of God in a room. This quenches the spirit. This takes you right out of the game. Thou shalt not judge. Don't judge in the name of God. Don't judge in the name of justice. Don't judge like anything. I know, I digress a little bit, but there was that. I felt what conviction felt like. I understood it for the very first time. There was a couple more stories. I was in grad school in Chicago several years later, and this renewal broke out in a tiny church in Toronto, Canada, the Toronto Renewal, the Toronto Revival. Do you guys know this history? I'm like 10, by now, something like 14 million people from around the world have visited this little church. At the time, the little church, it was another vineyard church, was far smaller than we are at Bluewater, but the Spirit fell one weekend when they were there having a conference. And it just became a thing. And people would walk into this church and just experience the power of the Lord and just fall down or just start weeping or just whatever. And millions of people from all over the world started visiting this church. They had to rent a big warehouse to accommodate everybody. It kind of became a thing. Church planting movements sprung from that little event. But I'm like, well, I got to go see this. So me and a buddy jumped in a car and we drove like 9 hours from Chicago to Toronto and went to this conference they were having. People were always at the church. So you just kind of walked in and you just sort of took part in whatever was going on. So we were there for a few days, and at the last day, I was in the auditorium, and I was sitting about 10 rows back, I think. And some guy up front, I don't know who it was just praying for the Spirit to fall. And again, I kind of felt it coming, and I got woozy. I just I'm just going to receive what the Lord gives me. And then I remember kind of falling down, and then I don't remember anything for a while. And I was down there for something like 3 hours. And when I came out of it, evidently I had been thrashing around so much that I took out 4 rows of chairs. I took out like the whole section. And I remember being on my back and opening my eyes and looking around. And people came from all over the world to this meeting. And I was circled by a bunch of people from South Korea who had come to visit, and they were taking pictures of me while I was down on the ground, thrashing around, all bruised and stuff. So that was comfortable. But it was a very weird experience for me. It was after the Lord was getting a hold of me and kind of shaking me on the ground. It's very dramatic. And I remember when I was in it, like I didn't know what was happening necessarily physically, but when I was in it, I remember the Lord saying one thing to me, and I definitely remember this. He said, are you willing to hear people's pain again? He said exactly that to me. Meaning, like, Jordan, if you're going to walk out your calling, I need you to be able to carry other people's burdens. I need you to be able to, walk in people during painful periods. And this is your life. I just want you to know that your life is carrying pain. Are you willing to do that? But he had to really shake me up to get that in. And at some certain point, I said yes. And that's probably when the thrashing stopped. And the Koreans left disappointed. I got story after story about that. Sometimes I tell the story of this conference that I went to in Colorado where I had this out-of-body experience during a very, very low time of my life. The Lord came to me and said, I love you, good job. And that was it. At a time when I felt like I had failed at absolutely every job and everything that I wanted. And so that was encouraging. The last time I can think of in a really, well, maybe not the last time, but the most significant last time was at a church in Framingham, Massachusetts, also a vineyard. At the end of the service, it was just an ordinary service, nothing special, but I was in a really low point in life. And at the end, they, at their church, like I do at this church, invited people to come up to the front, to the altar to receive prayer. Looked a lot like this. And so I remember I walked up. I didn't even get prayer from anybody. I just knelt here on this side, just knelt down in front of their little stage. They had stairs. And the Spirit came And I remember just weeping and weeping. Just all the sadness and grief that was happening in my life. But at the same moment, feeling God's mercy. It's like the Holy Spirit was weeping with me. It's like, then, yeah, I know. So I felt somehow safe, like I'd make it somehow, even though I was experiencing grief in a deep way. I share grief with the Lord a lot. Do you guys know who Blaise Pascal is? Blaise Pascal was a 17th century mathematician and philosopher. He's one of the most brilliant men in history because he was a genius in multiple disciplines. He's considered a philosophical genius. He wrote a book called Les Pensées, which is a book about rational philosophy of God. But it was during a time when enlightened thinkers didn't necessarily respect God very much. He was also the father of a certain branch of mathematics called probability theory, father of game theory and stuff like that. So really a genius guy. Through most of his life, he was kind of a nominal Catholic. And then at a certain point in his life, people observed that he just became a super zealous Christian, just like out of nowhere. And nobody understood exactly what had happened to him, but his entire philosophical career from that point on was all about God. Never explained to people why or what happened. And then he died. And they found in his coat, in the lining of his coat, they found a tear, and then in it they found a note that he had written to himself. And it was just titled The Memorial. And it was dated. The date was November 23rd, 1654, 10:30 p.m. till 12 a.m. So a very specific time slot, a 2-hour time slot in November of 1654. This was like 20 years after that they found it. But he had worn it in the lining of his jacket for all that time, transferring it from jacket to jacket, I suppose. And this is what was written. It was in his handwriting, written to himself, dated November 23rd, 1654, 10:30 p.m. till 12:30 a.m. Quote in French: Fire, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not of the philosophers and scholars. Certainty, certainty, feeling, joy, peace, God of Jesus Christ, my God and your God, forgetfulness of the world and everything except God. He is only found by the ways taught in the gospel, grandeur of the human soul. Righteous Father, the world has not known you, but I have known you. Joy, 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 tears of joy. That's what he wrote about this experience. I don't know what those 2 hours were like, but the first word he wrote was fire. And the last line was joy, 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 tears of joy. This man made contact with God. And it changed everything. Everything about his life and everything about the history of philosophy and the history of math to boot. Fire, joy, joy, joy. Why am I telling you all these stories? Because I want you to know that there is a way of making contact with God. And it's going to be different for you. Like I've had a number of these stories, and they're all a little bit different, right? Blaise Pascal had a story. The people in 2 Chronicles 5 had a story. The people in Acts chapter 2 had a story. We make contact with God. If you seek God, you're not just seeking, right? You're hopefully finding. And I just wanted to set some vision for you. And I wanted to say that these experiences are worth having, and only good things will come from making contact with God. Only good things. And one thing that will always happen when you make contact with God, if nothing else, we can say this: it will change you. It will change you. Then you have to live out that change. You have to walk with it. You know, how and in what ways it changes you is up to you, but it will definitely change you. It will terrify you into change. It will inspire you into change. It will encourage you into change. It will love you into change. It will burn you into change, but it will change you. And so here's our application point for this morning. I'll just leave you with this. If you need change in your life, please don't just seek change. Seek God himself. Seek the unchanging God, because there is nothing more changeful in the universe than making contact with the unchanging God. You need to change your life. You need to change something about your life. I don't know. You're too chaotic. You're too lonely. You're too prideful. You're too rich. You're too poor. You're too lazy. You're, I don't know, too fat, too skinny. Whatever it is, change it. One of my foundational beliefs in life is that you can change anything about you. Like, I hate the idea of identity because we have no idea what our identity is. We only know that when we see God, we'll be like him. We're told in 1 John. Anything you can change. But, don't just seek the change. Seek the God of life, the most changeful thing in the universe. Don't just seek the ways of God, although do that. Don't just seek knowledge of God, although please do that. Don't just seek service for God, although please do that. But please seek God himself. And if you have no idea about how to do that, then I refer you to the story from 2 Chronicles 5, or the verses that we read from Timothy, Paul's advice to Timothy. Be a special vessel. Do whatever you can to consecrate yourself to be a vessel so weird that the weird God could fill you. Put yourself in such an otherworldly place that you're likely to make contact with the otherworldly God. Make yourself a noble vessel rather than an ignoble vessel. Don't do it out of shame because God will be angry at you if you don't. No, do it as an exercise in seeking God. Wash yourself, whatever that means. Dedicate yourself. Fast, pray, worship, individually and in a group. I don't know, but take something that is ordinary in your life, throw it away, and just make space for something extraordinary to happen. That's what it means. Weird. Take something that's ordinary about you, perfectly justifiable, excusable, normal, and get rid of it. Get rid of it. And then whatever space it leaves behind, make it extraordinary, reserved solely for God. All sorts of things we can consecrate in our life. We can consecrate hours a day. We can consecrate days of the week. We can consecrate things about ourselves, our appetites. We can consecrate our mind. We can consecrate our sexuality. We can consecrate anything. You're done with normal in that area. And instead, you're ready to be filled with something that is abnormal, something that is godly and not common, because you're not a common people. Be a vessel for filling. I'll just take some time here at the end. You can think about that. Father God, we are a whole kingdom of priests, as we are told in the book of Hebrews. Like thousands of priests were ministering on that day at the temple when your glory fell. We've got a whole kingdom, a whole church full of priests. I encourage you in the name of Jesus to consecrate yourself for your priestly calling, to make contact with God for yourself and on behalf of your family and people. I do not know how you will seek after God himself, but do it.